Okay, we're going to get started, you guys, in just about 1 second here. So please grab your coffee and your water and juice and make yourselves comfortable. We know that we have several more folks going here, but in respect to your time, we need to get started. So thank you all very, very, very much for being here. And as others pop in the door, please welcome them as well. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. First of all, this workshop today on board development is co-hosted by Region 5 Development Commission, Sprout, who is our host of this wonderful facility, our food hub, and the 6 food cooperatives of the region that we affectionately call the Food Co-op Coalition of Region 5. So this workshop that you're about to participate in is also being video recorded. It will be archived on the Region 5 website, so other food co-ops and food access points across the state of Minnesota and broader can listen to this amazing information you're going to receive from our workshop instructor today, which is Ms. Linda Holliday, whose bio is on your tables and will be on our website as well, but is a trusted friend of mine that I've known for years and taught me an awful lot about what we do at Region 5. And her previous capacity at the Initiative Foundation, and now with Impact Minnesota, we're really lucky to have her with us. So I'm really, really excited about this workshop particularly. I also want to thank our funders of this work, which are the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, and that funding comes through the Good Food Access Program at their house and is appropriated dollars from the legislature every year. So we're very fortunate to be a recipient of MDA, Minnesota Department of Ag's Good Food Access Program, to bring all of these workshops, this one and the other 6 or 7, over a period of a year and a half to the region and to the food access points across the state. So with that, I think I also want to introduce, as you will, I'm sure, Stacy Headley, who will be with you for the rest of the day and be learning everything that I'm going to actually miss and watch on the video later. So thank you guys very much for being here, being prompt, and excited for Linda to take over and teach you. Also, one more expression of gratitude to Dying to Film, Riley, who is our videographer today, who's with us and is an artist in his own right, and we appreciate his talents as well. So thank you all very much.
I'm super excited to see you all again. I think I met several of you a couple years ago or a year ago when Cheryl started planning for the grant that provided the funding for this, and I was just super excited to work with the co-ops. I've been a long time member of a couple of your organizations and am a frequent customer, so absolutely thrilled to be here. I was wondering when I was putting this information together how I was going to possibly get through all of this in 3 or 4 hours, and then I double-checked the time and noticed that we've got 2 hours. So we're going to fly really high and really fast through a lot of information this morning. I'm going to speak very generally about board development and board effectiveness in some areas, and then I'm going to make an offer before you all leave. If you think there's any value in it, I want to provide some follow-up support to each of you with your individual boards. It's very difficult to do board development without having your entire board forward here. So we're going to talk about a lot of board fundamentals. I suspect that many of you are just as skilled and learned in many of these areas as I am, and so please feel free to contribute and share information. Don't hesitate to correct me if I say something that's inaccurate. Most of my experience, or all of my experience, essentially comes from working with nonprofit organizations, so 501c3s and other 501c organizations. So some of the information that I'm going to provide to you is in regard to 501c3s, but if they are not legal obligations of yours as cooperatives, I will indicate that. Many of them are best practices or promising practices that I consider for nonprofit organizations. So let's make sure this is going to work. So I'm gonna tell you what I heard from Stacy and Cheryl and their colleagues about what you were all looking for in terms of board development. I want to preface all of that one more time by saying we have about an hour and a half remaining. Any one of these areas I could spend 2 or 3 days on individually. So we're gonna, like I said, fly really high and really fast. I want to leave you with some really good resources and some information because I'm sure we're not going to be able to get through and down to the nitty-gritty, particularly as you're working with your entire boards and going through transitions. So here's what I heard. I'm looking to increase our understanding collectively of sort of board fundamentals. What is the purpose of a board of directors? What are the distinct roles and responsibilities of board directors? We can talk a little bit about the stages of development. It's interesting that you're all in very different stages as board of directors, and so we can talk about the nuances and the advantages and the challenges associated with being in any specific area of development or crossing, maybe having a foot in a couple of different areas. We'll talk a little bit about board and committee structure. And some of this you have a little bit of wiggle room to structure your board how you would like to. As far as I can tell, if you are, with the exception of Sprout maybe being structured as a 501c3 corporation, I believe that the rest of you are probably incorporated as I thought it was 308, but maybe it's 307, 308 A's or B's, which is a Minnesota cooperative. In some ways, you have more rules and regulations, more specifically to your operations, how you might pay out dividends, those kinds of things. Your boards of directors may have a little less regulation than a 501c3, and we'll talk a little bit about those nuances. In terms of enhancing your board effectiveness, I'm going to have you each go through and do a mini self-assessment. And this is obviously based on your own personal information. I encourage that every board of directors do a self-assessment annually, at least every other year. It offers ways to converse, look for areas of improvement, find out what some people's perceptions are of a board that may not be your own. So we'll walk through this mini self-assessment. I'm going to give you a choice, if we have the time, to either talk a little bit more about increasing the effectiveness of committees. And when I talk about committees, that might be committees, it might be task teams or advisory councils. You have the ability to structure those sort of non-board or board-associated committees in a few different ways that you may want to. Or talk about recruiting new board members. That's a real common concern for a number of boards of directors, is recruiting new members. So we'll probably hit one of those and not the other, but the information will be in your folder. Once again, I would also like to make an offer to be available to each of you either electronically or by phone if you'd like to talk about more specific nuances within your particular board of directors, if you think that would add value. Okay? And I can stick around afterwards too, if you're available and want to run some specific ideas or questions by me. Real quickly, I'm going to break you into, I was going to break you into like 3 or 4 small groups, but because we have a smaller group here, it might be just 2. I just always lay down what I call my rules of engagement, and these are just simple, being respectful to each other. These are all things that you know, but I like to hear, maybe I just like to hear myself say them. I want to make sure that all of our voices are heard, okay? So when you break into small groups and I stop being such a talking head, please ensure that everyone in your group gets an opportunity to be heard. So that simply means that everybody gets to speak once before anyone speaks twice. Okay, so we use a go-around process. So just be mindful of the limited time we have. You can certainly pass if you wish, if you don't have anything else to contribute. While it doesn't seem like we're dealing with highly confidential information in this room, dealing with board and staff can be kind of touchy You know, I hear some touchy stuff about some tensions and maybe some conflicts that happen. Let's just agree, if you would, that the information that we share with each other stays, that we're in a safe space right now, and that we trust and respect each other during those conversations, and that we're not having side conversations afterwards or during while someone else is talking. Fair? Any other rules of engagement, guidelines that people think are important? So what is board development? And I'm going to be a talking head for a little bit and just do some information sharing before I have you do the self-assessment. Board development, it's a verb, it's an action item really. It's simply the act of increasing the capacity, the skills, the awareness of your board of directors so that they can be more effective in carrying out your mission. Okay, it's as simple as that. You're just becoming better board members, right? How you do that, or the area that you need to do that around, could be dozens of different areas. So if you are talking about the structure of your board or restructuring your board, if you're defining or refining roles and responsibilities of your board members, if you're fine-tuning board staff relationships, all of these areas, if you're focusing on them and increasing your skills and capacities in those areas, that's board development, okay? Hopefully board development is something that's continuously happening at your organization. It shouldn't be a one-time activity. It's not an event, a retreat that you go off and do once a year. Hopefully you are continuously keeping an eye on the mark about how effective is your board of directors. Okay. If you're conducting strategic planning, that's board development. Okay. So what is the purpose? What is the purpose of a board of directors? Would you be willing to scribe some notes on our really fancy flip chart up there? What's the purpose of a board of directors? Anybody? Why do you think it's necessary?
For our co-op, it would be to represent all the owners in making decisions on how to run our communally owned business.
Yeah. So you're serving as a voice of your membership. Good.
But I think the number of people reflects getting a broader opinion.
Getting, well, it's,
A
yeah,
little different.
diverse representation, hearing diverse voices. Other reasons?
Also about oversight.
That's exactly the word I was just going to use, is oversight. Guidance. For me, more importantly, it's about meeting the mandates of the representation of the 501c3.
Yeah, yeah. And you all have mandates as regardless of how you're incorporated through the Secretary of State, you all have legal requirements as board of directors. As directors, yeah. I'm so sorry this doesn't work. Oh, now it does. So here's some very literal obligations and reasons why board of directors, whether it's for a cooperative, Minnesota cooperative, or a 501c3 or a 501c25, this is why a board of directors exists. It is your responsibility to determine the mission of your organization, which is simply your purpose. Why do you exist? Boards of directors are responsible for hiring, supporting, and evaluating executive staff, if and when you have them. Ensuring effective organizational planning, my hope is that all of your organizations have a strategic plan in place and that it's used as a real living document and it guides the work that you do. If you don't, it's something to consider to create a strategic plan. But whatever kind of planning you're doing, that's your role as a board of directors. To ensure that the organization's programs and services are consistent with its mission. You've all heard of mission creep, and you need to be real cautious of that. We all kind of want to put our arms around the whole world and create an organization that you can drive a truck through, and do everything for everybody. Monitor the effectiveness of programs and services. So it is your responsibility as a board of director to ensure that the services, the programs, the offerings that you have available are truly effective. Okay? That doesn't mean you have to have a real sophisticated evaluation system. Talking about evaluation could be a whole another workshop. But you should be monitoring that effectiveness. It is your responsibility to secure adequate financial resources for the operations, and that can be earned income through the sales of your food, or it can be contributed income in terms of, with the cooperatives, you probably are not allowed to receive tax-deductible contributions. Is that correct? Yeah. A 501c3 nonprofit is really the only nonprofit organization that can receive tax-deductible contributions. That doesn't mean that you can't receive contributions.
We are working with fiscal sponsors to pursue charitable missions.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah. Assist in the development of the organization's annual budget. Protect the assets and provide financial oversight. This might be one of the greatest pitfalls I see is directors on organizations that can't read a financial statement, just a basic balance sheet, or don't understand the annual budget. And I strongly suggest, and they're complicated. I don't always know what half the numbers mean myself, but it's important that you become attuned to reading those financial statements and understanding them. Assisting in identifying, recruiting, and orienting new board members, that is your responsibility. And obviously adhering to the legal and ethical standards and norms, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. Any questions or any additional areas that you can think of? I also had assessing the overall effectiveness of the board, and we talked about that in the beginning, that I would suggest that each one of your boards conduct at least, if not a large formal evaluation, at least a check-in with each other. How are we doing? Are we effective? Do we have the right leadership on the board? Do we have the right structure? And doing that frequently is really important. It's amazing what people might think that they haven't said, because they've never been asked. So you may have members that come forward and go, I've been really concerned about it. I can't read a financial statement. I haven't understood what we're talking about when we talk about our consent agenda or whatever that might be. These are for 501c3 nonprofits are legally required under all of these duties. And I think they're so important that I believe it's important enough that cooperatives follow these as well. So the duty of care, the duty of loyalty, and the duty of obedience are legal requirements of every nonprofit board member. The duty of care, and I have got more extensive information on this. I'm going to fly through this quickly. If you want to read more about these three duties, which are Minnesota state law, this is a really great little handbook for you. But the duty of care simply states that board members will be active participants. Okay, you're not just a board member in name. You need to actively participate in in regular meetings of the board, in committees of the board. You are responsible to ensure that board minutes are being taken and that action is being documented, and so on. Duty of loyalty is probably the most important and the one we hear about most often. And this is mostly about conflict of interest, okay? If you're serving on a board of directors, your first loyalty is to that organization. And your interest is in the best interest of that organization. So you can't bring personal interests forward and gain financially or personally or have any family members gain any kind of benefit, financial benefit particularly, from that organization. Does that make sense? You should all have a conflict of interest policy, a written policy in place, and your board members should sign, regularly. And you probably are already doing that, conflict of interest policies. And then the duty of obedience is I was going to say simply, and it's not really simple, but the duty of obedience means that you are responsible for ensuring that the organization is complying with your written bylaws, so your group policies and bylaws in any state and national legal matters, okay? So that you're in compliance legally at all times. So you're submitting your annual audit reports, that you're legally responsible to ensure that staff is functioning, operating legally, no one's embezzling dollars, those kinds of things. Any questions about these? I'll pass these around if they're of interest to you. Again, a 501c3 nonprofit organization they are the ones who are legally bound by these. But I think they're important enough for everyone. The individual responsibilities, and I'll go through these really quickly. These are fairly obvious, but as an individual of a board, you are responsible, obviously, for regular attendance at meetings and functions and special meetings of your board, staying informed and informing others out in the community of the work that's being done, reviewing agendas and supporting materials prior to a meeting. Hopefully you're receiving those things in advance of a meeting. Serving on committees or task forces. Making a personal financial contribution. What do you think of that?
I think that's really hard when you're already asking a board of directors, a member of your board, to volunteer a considerable amount of time and intellectual capacity, and then to additionally make a financial contribution. I would rather have my board of directors member helping me do fund development and program management that allows for more fiscal responsibility than asking them to do a personal contribution.
Yeah.
That's my personal opinion. We're already tasking them at times with, 5 or 6 extra hours of work, monthly, bi-monthly, depending on what the bylaws say and how you have to meet your bylaws for your meetings. But
Yeah.
I think it's hard to ask people to make a personal contribution.
Yeah.
Especially if you're trying to recruit a very diverse range of incomes to serve on your board. But when it comes to fundraising, and my experience with nonprofits is also that when you're asking for money, it's easier to ask for money if you said, I've also contributed to this project because I believe in it deeply myself. So there is that benefit, but.
And in co-ops, the nice thing is to be on the board, you gotta be an owner. So you've already
Invested.
So I mean, it's a little.
Financially invested.
Right, you have made a contribution, but I tend to agree, even if it's $10, if you're fundraising, having somebody, being able to say our entire board of directors has contributed. So it makes a stronger case for when you're going to somebody else.
Do you raise additional dollars as co-ops? Do you ask for contributions and donations?
We have not yet, but for build out, we will, when we come to build out, there'll be, owner loan campaign. So we'll be looking for what did they say, Jim, about 20 to 30% of the folks to step forward and make larger contributions than just their ownership share.
Yeah. I agree, Arlene. I think it's a huge ask. I don't know that people coming on to boards of directors understand everything in terms of time and resources and energy that they're going to be giving, you know, that they're required to give. And so asking them to go above and beyond that can be really difficult. That said, I won't personally go out and fundraise for an organization that the board isn't at 100% giving. I just cannot look someone in the eye and ask them for money if I can't say that 100% of my board of directors has given. I don't care if that's $5 a year. It is absolutely at what somebody's ability, you know, or desire is. But it's much easier to go to, you know, whether it's funders, grant makers, or individuals, or corporate sponsors, or other members. So, yeah. I believe that everyone should give. I also believe it's a difficult thing to ask. Yep. Additional individual responsibilities is obviously that board members should suggest future board members, additional board members, follow conflict of interest in confidentiality policies, and those policies should be very explicit to every board member when they come on. You know, you should have a board orientation pamphlet or whatever, and they should have a clear understanding of what your policies and procedures are. Refrain from making special requests. That's that whole conflict of interest. You know, you're not there for any kind of individual gain or for gain of your family. And obviously assisting the board in carrying out its fiduciary responsibilities. And that was those three areas of care that we talked about. So we're going to talk briefly about the different stages of board development, and some of these mimic organizational development. You know, an organization as a whole goes through different stages. And we've talked about those just because we've only got 3 organizations here, and so we have a pretty good feel for where you're at. I just want you to be aware that none of these are mutually exclusive, if you will. You know, most organizations, most boards of directors are going to feel somewhere like they've maybe got a foot in a couple of them. You may have organizations that are very well established that have been around for many, many years. The Crossing Arts Alliance that I'm a part of has been around for almost 30 years. And we go back to very much looking like a forming board at times. Or an institutional board. You know, we go kind of in and out of those, and that's very common. So a founding or forming board, Susie and Jim, I think you've kind of described that quite a bit, where these are people who are really passionate about the mission, who come together. They tend to be people who have a very strong sense of ownership for this new idea. They're often a working board. They don't have staff necessarily. So if they do actually have a physical presence somewhere, they're unlocking doors, they're probably selling groceries in some cases at the cash register. And again, it's composed of individuals who have a very close, tight relationship to the mission. Okay? You guys talked a little bit about your personal passions, that your family needed certain foods, and that's what got you there. That's very common with a founding or a forming organization. So we call it forming, storming, and norming. So the next phase then is that storming. Okay, you're really getting to a place where you're probably bringing on staff, and you're trying to figure out that balance between staff and board power and relationships. You're formalizing your decision making, so you may have more policies and procedures in place. There's a heavier focus on those policies and systems and planning and getting that information documented as a board, formalizing those procedures. And then you're beginning to recruit members with more specialty skills. So in the case of a food co-op or an egg-related nonprofit, Many of your original board members probably have a lot of background or experience or education or passion in agriculture, in foods, in buying and eating local, okay? You want to really expand that as you get more into a norming or a storming organization rather. We have board members on the Crossing Arts that, we have a member who doesn't like art, so he says. We kind of give him a lot of crap about it, but he's like, I don't like art. I don't care about art. I don't do art. I don't care about art. I don't buy art. But he has some very specialty skills outside of that area. Now we know he really does, but he likes to kind of yank our chain a little bit.
Banana up as a piece of art.
Yes, that would, yes, yeah, exactly, yeah. That's John Rayboyne, and I can say all this out loud because he loves to be called out on stuff. He likes the attention. But it's very true. I mean, he didn't come with a passion for the arts. He had very little understanding of what the importance of the arts were to a community, what an economic impact they can have, what a social impact they can have on children and families and so on. He came with a very specialty set of skills in law. He's an attorney in the community. And he also had relationships with people with deep pockets. I'll be really honest with you, and you'll see that as your boards continue to develop. So then the next area would be what we're called norming, and this is an institutional board. They're serving more of a governance role, probably, than they are an operations role. They have a very clear identity. This is probably where I would put the Crossing Arts at this point. Okay, but that doesn't mean, like I said, that we don't look a lot like a forming board at times, where many of us are in there, getting our hands dirty and doing the work day to day. Pretty strong, significant focus on fund development at this point. We have a more diverse membership. Hopefully that reflects the diversity in our community, whether that's economic diversity or racial diversity, gender diversity. Those are things to always pay attention to. Oversight is delegated to committees. So generally a board at this level is having quick, efficient meetings. Okay, you might have a consent agenda that might include a lot of things that you just boom, accept that, move on to the next thing. It really is, I don't like to use the word rubber stamping, but they really are just moving very efficiently, and the work is being done by committees or task teams or advisory councils, and they're bringing recommendations forward at that point. Heavy reliance on executive staff, and that's not uncommon. Hopefully you can do that. Hopefully you have an executive director or a store manager or whatever it is who you have a lot of faith and trust in, and you know that they're going to bring it up if you've got some red flags going on. You have to have eyes in the back of your head and the side of your head at all times, but you do rely probably more significantly on a very trusted executive senior staff. Okay. The final one I include that we don't hear about too often is what I call a generative board. And this is a very sophisticated stage of development for a board. They truly are very just rubber stampish. They are not asking even as much for like dashboard information. They are very, very forward thinking. This is a board that does not want to know what's happening on a day-to-day basis generally. That's not what board meetings are for. They are truly strategic and looking out into the future. 5 years from now, 10 years from now, asking each other very strategic questions about what are some of the trends that are happening demographically, in our sector, whatever that might be, and how should we be planning to move forward over the next 5 to 10 years. Does that make sense? I don't think any board is completely generative. they still need to be in compliance and be aware of what's happening with their fiduciary responsibilities, but they're spending the bulk of their meeting time together looking forward quite a bit. I think there should be a goal to always look to advance to the next stage of development without losing sight of, of important characteristics that you need to still pay attention to. The last stage of development, which is also more common, unfortunately, than we'd like to see, would be dissolution, obviously, when an organization is dissolving. And I was on the board of a organization that was in existence for over a decade, and we dissolved. And it was a lot of work for our board of directors for about a year. There's a lot of legal implications and a lot of paperwork that needs to be done. A lot of reporting to the state and to the Internal Revenue Service. And so we had to stay in, as a board, we had to stay together for at least a year after the organization or while the organization was closing. That was the Center for Nonprofit Excellence out of St. Cloud. And we dissolved, I always say we should all be working towards organizations, nonprofit organizations, not necessarily co-ops, but we should all be working toward our organizations not being needed, as charitable organizations. I mean, if we achieve our mission and we help people become either out of poverty or, domestic abuse is no longer, we're never going to work ourselves out of a job, but that should be our goal, is to truly achieve our vision. I'm getting off on a tangent here. Any other questions about stages of board development? So structure, these are things I suspect many of you know. I just wanted to list them here. The membership on your board of directors for co-ops, for the 307As and Bs, you are required to have at least 5 board members unless you have fewer than 50 overall members. Okay, so you have to have at least 5 board members. Nonprofit 501c3s, you have to have at least 3 board members legally. All of your board members should have job descriptions, and that should be something that you create and provide to potential board members. We'll talk a little bit more about that when I talk about engaging and recruiting new board members. And I've got some templates here that I can provide to you. Legally, as a nonprofit, as a 501c3, you're required to have a secretary and a treasurer, I believe. That may be the only 2 roles legally. As a co-op, you're required to have a president, at least 1 vice president, and a treasurer. Oftentimes you'll see a secretary-treasurer position combined, and that's just fine. It sounds a little shallow, but titles are cheap. Titles are really cheap. And if you encourage somebody to invest more and give more of their time and energy by calling them a vice chair or a vice president, that can be really meaningful to some people. Or if you've got some young people on your board that are, trying to build their resume, make them a vice chair. This kind of stream of consciousness, I'm just thinking about this out loud, what the advantages would be. But any questions about officers? I don't go into officer roles too heavily, but that's something that you want to pay close attention to, is what is the role of a chair or a president and the vice chair. And they also should have distinct job descriptions as well that define their roles and responsibilities. Being a board chair or board president is a huge responsibility if you're a good one. I've seen some lousy ones. Say that again?
Oftentimes you'll find the general description of their duties in the bylaw, within the scope of the bylaws.
Yeah, and there probably should be like a little short paragraph. But the nuances of that, they really do. Then they vary between the chairperson. You know, John Rayboyne, like I talked about, he was our board chair last year. He literally would stop into the Crossing Arts Alliance every single day. Now our executive director was like, get out of here, John. She'd just say that, get out of here, John. Had enough of you this week, you know. But he was very, very hands-on. You know, not as much with our current chair, but she's talking to staff and going into the organization at least once a week. It's a huge responsibility to be a chairperson. And that's why it's nice to have some vice chairs, vice presidents, or at least one. So board committees. Yeah, you know, I would say the only exclusive committee to the board should be the executive committee. And that should be made up of your officers. And I believe every organization, if you've got a board of directors, should have an executive committee that's made up of your chair, any vice chairs, treasurer, secretary, any other officers. And that committee should be meeting at least monthly. And they should have the powers to make any kind of emergency decisions or take emergency action. You know, a delegation of authority should spell that out. They can also act as your governance committee, which recruits and talks about future board members, so executive and governance can be one. I think as a co-op, I think you're required to have an audit committee. I think you're legally required to have an audit committee. Now, you could assign that to your full board can serve as your audit committee, but you should have that in writing somewhere. That should be named.
So when you say audit committee, are you talking financial audit?
Yes.
Beyond the scope of hiring an outside professional firm?
Yes, you should have an audit committee, and I would suggest the same for any nonprofit organization. You're not legally required to, but your finance committee could serve in that role. Now, not every nonprofit undergoes an audit. Not all of you are legally required, depending on where your funds are coming from and how much you're getting. You're not necessarily required to conduct an audit, but your finance committee should be keeping at least much closer tabs on the financials. You know, where they can go into the weeds beyond the dashboard. Yeah. Committees can be extremely helpful, and they don't have to be board committees. And beyond the executive committee and the governance, kind of executive/governance committee, I think it's valuable to have outside members, whether those are alumni, board. It's a great way to engage alumni, board members who are no longer on the board of directors, to have them serve on a committee. But you can call them task teams, you can call them advisory councils. You know, they don't have to be exclusive to the board. Every board member should know coming on to a board of directors that they are responsible for helping raise funds. I don't care if that's a co-op or a nonprofit organization. You should be very explicit about that with a new board member, that you are responsible for helping us identify and access resources. That said, that doesn't mean they have to be out knocking on people's doors and making a direct ask. You know, maybe they're writing thank you notes. Maybe they're helping write a grant. Maybe they're helping write a report for a grant funder. There's a lot of different things they can be doing in terms of fund development. The number one reason why people volunteer is because they were asked. And so a lot of times it's the same with membership to your stores. And coming to Great River Arts, or coming to Sprout, is because somebody came up to them face to face and said, boy, I sure would love to have you come on Saturday, or you've got a skill that we could really use. It's really about meeting people face to face and making the ask. You know, if they don't have a reason to walk in there, they probably won't. Or if they don't know what that reason is yet, they're just not going to come yet. So that's a whole nother workshop on building awareness in public relations, and I wouldn't be teaching that one, but more on committees and advisory councils. I think a standing committee needs to be an executive committee. I would argue that you should have a standing committee as a Finance Committee should be a standing committee, and Audit, I believe, double check on that one, but I'm almost sure you're required to have an Audit Committee as a cooperative. And those should be standing committees. You can have ad hoc committees that maybe only meet for a certain point in time. So if you're going through a relocation, you need, some committees, maybe it's architects and with specialty skills, stuff like that. Those can be ad hoc committees or advisory councils or task teams. So with our limited time, I'm going to talk real quickly about engaging existing and recruiting new board members, but there's kind of two small activities in your folder. One is around this committee structure, and I think I'll just call your attention to it at this point. Inside your folders is a committee charter, and this can often, I find it to just be really helpful tool. If you do have a committee, whether they're ad hoc or a task team, if they're not clear about what their purpose is and what their value is, then you're just going to be spinning wheels. People are going to feel like they're just meeting for the sake of meeting, and we all know we don't need any more of those. So walking through and establishing a committee charter or an advisory council charter can be a really helpful tool. And it's simply kind of fill in the blanks here. What is your purpose or mission statement? You don't have to beat that one to death. Just why do we exist? If it's a fund development committee, it's to increase the income of the organization, whatever that might be. What type of committee? Defining that, whether you're an ad hoc committee or a standing committee or a task team. Who is going to chair that and take notes of that? Formalizing those committees it's really important to people and playing those roles. Activities and duties is something, you don't want to beat yourself up on getting too down in the weeds with that, but it's helpful to have an answer to that. Meeting logistics, when are you going to meet? When are you going to meet? Where are you going to meet? If you're asking somebody to serve on a committee, you should at the very least have an answer to that. Membership, thinking about who's serving on that committee, obviously, whether they're board or non-board members. And that delegation of authority is an important question. Your board of directors has ultimate authority over your organization, so any committees or advisory councils should be reporting directly to the board. And you want to be cautious about the decisions that they can and can't make. If it's a finance committee, they shouldn't be making any kind of investment decisions or lending decisions without the authority or sanction of the full board. But they may have a small pool of resources, that they can spend without having to come back to the full board or something. Okay. So I'm going to send you back with that committee charter worksheet. I apologize about the color. That's really obnoxious. But yeah, and I'd be happy to send you an electronic copy of that too. And it's just a nice exercise to go through. Common committees, we already talked about that, and some standing or ad hoc committees that may come through. In the committee activity, you can do that on your own. So recruiting and engaging board members is one of the biggest things I hear, both from executive directors and board members, is that it's really challenging to do, is to find good board members and keep them engaged. A study by Board Source, I think it was, which is a national organization, recently, more than half of the executive directors and board members said it was difficult to recruit, and fewer than 75% of executive directors say they have the right board. So those are pretty significant numbers. So this is what I believe are the 5 critical steps to recruiting good board members, is be prepared, lay the foundation ahead of time. Okay, so whether that's job descriptions or a board orientation booklet, make sure that you have those things in place prior to going out and speaking to someone about being on the board. And let me just say, when you think about board recruitment, I feel so strongly about this. I feel the same way when you're asking for money, whether you're writing a grant or asking for straight out donations. Present this as an opportunity, not a plea, not a desperate plea. Seriously, you guys are doing great work. It should be an honor for someone to serve on your board. It should be an honor. It doesn't mean it doesn't, they're not contributing a lot. But if you go down on bended knee and make it a desperate plea, yeah, you're really not elevating the importance of that position. Right, yeah, you want it to be an opportunity for them and a distinguished opportunity. And you should have a slate of prospective board members at all times. A full slate of prospective board members. I really believe that. So I think the next step is really envisioning your ideal board. It's like establishing a vision statement. What does our absolute ideal board of directors look like? And then go out and try to fill that. You talk to your existing board about, this is what our ideal looks like. How do we get there now? And how do we recruit additional folks in the future? Most of the time on the boards I've served on, we look for we start by thinking about a certain skill set. We need someone who has accounting experience. We need someone who has legal experience. And so we start there. And of course, every attorney in town has been asked to be on every nonprofit board, But kind of starting from this vantage point and thinking more about all of those sectors outside of that, it's a nice exercise for an entire board to go through. And I would guess if you had every one of your board members go through this, and there may be other sectors, one of them that I like to think about, because both Little Falls and Brainerd, I'm not even going to do that, Little Falls and Brainerd both have a leadership development program through their chambers of commerce. Those are some great prospects to serve on boards. They may not have a lot of seasoned experience, because a lot of them are in emerging leadership candidates, but I'll tell you, they're going to be eager to learn, and may turn out to be some of your most engaged board members. So think about doing this with the rest of your board members, and I bet you'd come up with at least 50 names. And like I said, they may not all be strong prospects, but at least you're beginning to kind of brainstorm about that. Questions about completing that? So obviously the next piece is about nominating and electing new members. And you want to be really mindful about timing so that you don't have a vacancy on your board and needs to fill it by next month. Doing this well in advance, always having an ongoing slate of prospective board members. Inviting prospective board members to come to a meeting or two. They obviously can't play any role. They can't vote or take any action on issues, but they can come and observe a meeting or two. And so they really have a better understanding of what kind of commitment they're making. And then orienting and keeping board members informed. You should have a board packet, a 3-ring binder, for every board member, with history of the organization, any legal documents of the organization, especially for new board members, any significant funding, financial reports. So they're very well informed about what their roles and responsibilities and what their expectations are. And again, I've got some sample job descriptions if you're interested in that. Engaging board members, just really quickly, because we're near out of time here. Engaging board members, this sounds like really simplistic counsel, but really it's finding out if you've got a board member who isn't engaged, who isn't contributing, someone needs to have a face-to-face conversation with them. Hopefully it's a board chair, possibly an executive, along with your executive director, and find out what they're interested in. If they're not even coming to board meetings, then you've got a problem and it's a logistical thing and you need to find out why. But if they're not engaged in any other committees, find out what they're what are you interested in? What are we doing that we can get more of your time and attention for this organization? I think you need to make it personal when it comes to engaging board members, because if you just have kind of a boilerplate job description that every board member has to do fundraising and every board member has to do this kind of governance, you're going to end up alienating some. And so find out what the nuances are of their personal passions. I think every board of directors should have some kind of retreat. You've always got some area of board development that you can, tuck into a day long or a half day agenda, but including some personal things, getting to know each other better. I mean, it doesn't have to be invasive, but you see each other once a month or once every other month for an hour and a half. It doesn't really allow for the building of personal relationships. I think we've talked about most of these. These are just kind of I call them my top 8 pitfalls of boards where I see organizations not doing well. The first, obviously, is having board members who don't even know what your mission is. And quite literally, your board members should be able to recite your mission statement. Hopefully you don't have a mission statement that you can, that's forever long. Hopefully it's a sentence or 2 at the most. But they should know what your organization does and be able to share that with anybody out in the community. Getting into the weeds, depending on where you are in the stage of development, some of you do have to be concerned about day-to-day operations. But if you've got staff and you trust that staff, don't micromanage them. That's not a good use of a board of directors in getting too far into the weeds. Not having a plan, whether that's a good business plan or a strategic plan, something that's guiding the work that you're doing. We all are, we're living and operating in small rural communities with extremely limited resources. It's really easy to be all things, to try to be all things to all people. And so that's where we see that mission creep. And if we've got that strategic plan where we can go, that's a great idea, but it just doesn't fall into our priorities at this time, it's really a really valuable document if it's not sitting and collecting dust. Poor participation, we see that on every board. Our board members are just not showing up. They're not serving on committees or task teams, not evaluating your executive director or your store manager. That is not a punitive act to evaluate your executive director. It's something that person, he or she, deserves, and they should know ahead of time what they're being evaluated on. So they should have annual benchmarks that are based on that, that strategic plan at the high level, maybe an annual work plan, their job description, and that's what they should be evaluated on, is against those documents. Poorly run meetings, that's the worst, to go to a poorly run meeting. Make sure whoever's your chairperson and or your executive director is preparing documents ahead of time, getting those out. Not contributing money, I know there's some tension around that question, but I truly believe that everybody should be contributing funds. And not understanding the financial model of the organization. So those are some pitfalls. Obviously, the converse of all those, the opposite of all those, would probably be my top. Knowing those things or following through with those things would be what effective boards look like. Some additional organizations. Board Source is a really fabulous organization. They require a annual membership fee, but they have a lot of free stuff out there too that you don't have to be members of. If you've got, if your board has some discretionary funds and they would like to invest in Board Source, that's great. You can access some additional things. Minnesota Council of Nonprofits has a lot of information out there. Blue Avocado is and Nonprofit AF. And I would tell my friend John Rayboyne, who's the attorney that doesn't stand for Air Force. He wears an AF t-shirt, and I don't know if any of you know, or all of you know what AF stands for. I won't say it out loud, but he wears an AF t-shirt, and it's an Air Force t-shirt. Both Blue Avocado and Nonprofit AF are just really great blog sites that have some really cool information available, and you can subscribe for free or just go to them. I get regular emails from both Blue Avocado and Nonprofit AF. Most of them are interesting and helpful. I didn't put sites down because you can just Google any of these and find their websites. So it's 11:20 now. We went a little over. I apologize for that. I hope this was somewhat helpful. Any final reflections or questions or input? Yeah, thank you, you guys.